Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And tonight, because our subject is British, we're going to have the British comedian Ricky Gervais introduce him.
I don't think he knew I was then. I think someone told him afterwards, and I gave him a DVD of The Office, and I got an email out of the blue from him. He's like the FBI. He just got my email. I think he's like plugged in to the World Wide Web, and he just put, I watched, I laughed, what do I do now? And we became sort of pen pals. And I remember I sent him an email for his, I think, 57th or 58th birthday, and I put, happy birthday. And I put, 58? Isn't it time you got a proper job? Ricky Gervais, 42, comedian. He sent back, I have a proper job. David Bowie, rock god.
Well, our subject tonight is that rock god, David Bowie, who died recently at the age of 69. He was born David Jones, but he changed his name when he was a teenager to avoid confusion with the Monkees' Davy Jones, whose podcast we've done. I don't know why, but he selected his name after Jim Bowie and the Bowie knife. That's why I'm going to use an American version of his pronunciation, Bowie, as opposed to the British pronunciation, Bowie. You'll hear in our British segment they pronounce it Bowie, but in true David Bowie fashion, he pronounced it Bowie, but he allowed us Americans to do it differently. As the Encyclopedia of Rock characterized him, David Bowie was the consummate musical chameleon and created a career in the 60s and 70s that featured as many guises: folk singer, androgyne, alien, decadent, blue-eyed soul man, modern rock star, each one spawning a league of imitators. While these experiments were greeted with varying degrees of artistic and commercial success, Bowie remained one of the most restless and venturesome classic rock survivors. And even though David Bowie was indeed a rock god, I'm not going to talk too much about his music tonight because you could have heard that all over after his death. I'm going to use this podcast more to talk about him as a Renaissance man. I do have to tell you though, I'm not the biggest fan of David Bowie's music. I understand people who are, but I'll tell you, I don't think anybody else sang duets with Bing Crosby and Mick Jagger. Here he is with their Bingle in 1977, right before Bing died, and they're doing a Christmas version of The Little Drummer Boy.
And this one. This is my son's favourite. Do you know this one?
Oh, I do indeed. It's a lovely thing.
They told me, ba-rum-pa-pum-pum, a newborn king to see, ba-rum-pa-pum-pum. Our finest gifts we bring, ba-rum-pa-pum-pum, rum-pa-pum-pum, rum-pa-pum-pum. Peace on earth. Can it be?
Yeah, it may have been his son's favorite song, but David Bowie hated that song, refused to sing it. That's why they had to put the counterpoint in. Here's the same guy a couple of years later doing a duet with Mick Jagger on the Martha Reeves and the Vandella classic Dancing in the Street, and he upstages Mick Jagger, and that's not easy to do. Just those two performances alone would make him a rock god. But as I said, we're going to refer to him more as a Renaissance man, and we're going to turn to the BBC4 Matthew Bannister Last Word for the British intellectual perspective on David Bowie.
We've heard and seen a lot of David Bowie this week, but in case you've missed it, here's his appearance in SpongeBob SquarePants.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am the Lord Royal Highness, but my friends call me LRH.
My friends call me SpongeBob.
I'm a laughing girl and you can't catch me. I'm a laughing girl and you can't catch me.
It was David Bowie's refusal to follow the herd, to do the expected, that made him so intriguing. His many incarnations and changes of direction right up to his death meant that he never settled into a predictable path or became a tribute band to himself as other aging stars have done. But we'll look at his influence on us and at the influences that shaped him. Dylan Jones is the editor of the men's style magazine GQ. He got to know David Bowie while writing a book about him.
David Bowie came into my life as he came into many people's lives
in the summer of 1972. I was watching Top of the Pops. I, like every other impressionable 11, 12 and 13-year-old, thought that I was the only person that had seen this sort of monumental event.
Didn't know what time it was, the lights were low. I leaned back on my radio.
Why did it make such an impression, not just on you, but on me too?
It was the music, the way he looked. He looked literally like he'd sort of come out of space, which is obviously the intention.
There's a starman waiting in the sky.
Searching for music is like searching for God. They're very similar. There's an effort to reclaim the unmentionable, the unsayable, the unseeable, the unspeakable. All those things comes into being a composer, into writing music, into searching for notes and pieces of musical information that don't exist. Somebody asked me the dumbest question, but my God, it was hard to answer. They said, why do you do what you do? I thought, that's an awful question to answer. I really had to think about that.
A lot has been said about his influence on popular music, on fashion and so on. As somebody who keeps an eye on style in the way that you do professionally, did he directly affect what people wore and the way they presented themselves?
I think it's more than that. We've just had Men's Fashion Week in London. I said at the end, everyone has been touched in some way by David Bowie. He had such a huge effect on how we carried ourselves and how we've lived our lives and what we aspire to. And that sounds kind of dramatic and a bit pompous, but I think it's really true.
Stanley Spencer brought the Christian story right to the heart of his beloved home of Cookham, on the banks of the River Thames.
Whilst we were being influenced by him, Bowie was picking up his own influences from many different sources, most notably modern art. He wrote articles for Modern Painters magazine and agreed to present a TV documentary about his own hero, the painter Stanley Spencer. The producer was Francis Waitley.
What is so extraordinary about the man is that he was as much interested in Stanley Spencer as he was in SpongeBob, Coronation Street as in Mark Rothko. He was a proper Renaissance man whose curiosity marked him out.
When he wasn't talking about art, he was incredibly down to earth, very affable, very blokey. He didn't talk about football very much, but he pretty much talked about everything else. He wanted to know what's going on. He was an incredible magpie.
You get the sense that this was a man who managed his public image right down to his final act of the way his last album was released. He was somebody who was meticulous about keeping the David Bowie who was out there under his control.
I have to say that's true, and although it's very ghoulish to say so, I actually do think that he did orchestrate the release of the record. Now, if you look at the videos and you look at the lyrical content of Black Star, it is a very fitting end to his career. It's the end of the narrative arc, and it's very difficult to watch those videos without feeling an incredible sort of amount of poignancy, because he obviously knew he was dying.
Look up here, I'm in heaven.
But you feel as though we didn't quite get to know the real David Bowie, because what we saw was the image that he wanted to project to us.
I don't think that's true. I think that we did know the real David Bowie. The real David Bowie has expressed himself ad nauseum over the last 40, nearly 50 years.
I was trying to work out who else, who is still alive, would get similar treatment when they go. Have you had thoughts about that?
Well, again, to be ghoulish, yes, I have. And I think the only person who would get the same amount of reverence and warrant the same amount of attention in the press is Bob Dylan.
So I'm joined by Dr. Richard Mills, a senior lecturer in film and popular culture, who's written about Bowie's impact on fashion. Richard, first of all, do you agree with Dylan Jones that only Bob Dylan would get this same level of coverage and acclaim when he dies?
On one level, because Bowie was a self-reflexive, intellectual pop star, an artist. Dylan Jones uses the Bob Dylan example. But I think in terms of cultural phenomenon, Jagger, McCartney would probably get as much column inches and much time in the television and radio as well.
And is it merited? Has it gone over the top? Has there been too much, do you think?
I don't actually, because I think Bowie's work is about blurring the boundaries between low and high culture, and what he did was bring high culture into the mainstream. And the little build-up to the piece that we're just doing, they referenced Stanley Spencer, Andy Warhol. I was an RTE earlier this week, and I mentioned the last two albums, and they're certainly in the tradition of the stagecraft of Beckett's last plays. Even Yeats's last poems, the lyrics are that good. I mean, a week before he died, W.B. Yeats wrote a poem called The Black Tower. And now we've got Black Star, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So I don't feel too rarefied or too pretentious or self-conscious about putting Bowie really into this corpus of serious artists, because he is that important. We haven't really mentioned the music that much.
Well, no, obviously we've let others do that earlier in the week, but I mean, you're writing a forthcoming book about icons of Englishness in popular music, and you've included him, and he was quintessentially English, wasn't he?
Absolutely. He comes from a long tradition of music hall. He would have been a popular musical entertainer, possibly even a mainstream entertainer, apart from that artistic gene that he had that led him into strange different areas. But I'd also there's one sort of caveat about his Englishness as well. He's also very much an international performer as well. I mean, like all of us, he's a kaleidoscopic mess of different strains and influences. So he's also, there's the Berlin years, there's the New York years. Of course, originally his music comes from rhythm and blues and rock and roll. His first hero, Little Richard. So, like all of us, he inherits lots of different cultural strains.
Well, to sum up David Bowie's career, I thought I'd read from my newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, and their editorial obituary on him from January 12, 2016, entitled Sound, Vision, and David Bowie. At the start of the 1970s, rock and roll was happy with its transformation from the era of matching haircuts and suits, think early Beatles, to long-haired bad boys in leather trousers, think Jim Morrison of the Doors. Then, wham bam, came David Bowie in the persona of Ziggy Stardust, an outlandish alien rock star with an orange mullet hairdo and high plastic boots. Ziggy, who led a band called the Spiders from Mars, was discarded after a while. He was one of several alter egos Bowie created as he stretched rock music from its roots as a gritty, modern version of the blues to encompass the drama and glamour of the theater. If you're wondering how spandex and glitter ever found a place in traditional rock, that's the influence of David Bowie. Not many people would have predicted that Bowie would turn out to be one of the most enduring and most endearing figures in rock music. Yet news of his death Sunday at age 69 deeply touched many people around the globe. The singer and songwriter was born David Jones in London, but became David Bowie, an androgynous mystery man with movie star looks and shape-shifting taste. A style arbiter, Bowie was one of the first rock stars to understand the power of music videos. He was also one of the first to realize the internet would decimate the music industry. He avoided the coming debacle in 1997 by issuing Bowie bonds on Wall Street. Essentially, he sold to investors the rights to future royalties. Bowie never stopped creating, never stopped drawing the attention of the devoted and the just plain curious. On Friday, his birthday, David Bowie released his 25th studio album, Black Star, a stunning rock-jazz collaboration that's as innovative as anything else in his catalog. How to sum up David Bowie? As a songwriter, he identified his muse in one catchy refrain from the 1977 album Low. Don't you wonder sometimes, he sang, about sound and vision? He had it. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. And I'm going to close tonight with his first #1 hit in 1975 that he co-wrote, coincidentally, with John Lennon. It's the song Fame. Both he and John Lennon experienced international fame and understood the vicissitudes of it and didn't chase it later in life. It's interesting that John Lennon and the Beatles helped popularize rock as a communal experience in the early 1960s, and David Bowie helped popularize rock as an individual experience in the 1970s. By the way, one of the first times he sang the song publicly was on Soul Train here in the United States, making him one of the first white performers on Soul Train. Just another amazing thing about David Bowie.
Hey, make some of you take things over. Hey, let them loose, hard to swallow. Hey, put you there where things are hollow. Hey, the brain is just a flame. The bunch of touch if you will. Say,
I guess taking away all the theatrics or the costuming and all the outer layers of what it is, I'm a writer, that's what I do. I write. And I started examining the subject matter that I write about. And it really only boils down to a few songs, based around loneliness to a certain extent, some kind of spiritual search, and are looking for a way into communicating with other people. And that's about it.